In this video, we are recreating this shot inspired by Foundation title sequence. My goal with this was not to copy original title exactly, but also to add my own twist to it. Big shout out to Adam Hogan, who has a great attempt of recreating this in Houdini, as well as a breakdown from original creator Daniel Krivoruchko that you can find on YouTube. And you should also check out his website for some inspiration. I'll be doing this in Blender 4.5. In a new Blender scene, we can delete the default cube, and I'm gonna reset the camera's rotation and location with Alt-R and Alt-G. And I'm gonna rotate it by 90 degrees on the x-axis. And we can move this back a little bit. We can adjust this later on. I'm gonna go to camera view by pressing 0 on a numpad, and we can add a plane to the scene and rotate it by 90 degrees on the x-axis. This is gonna be our flag. We can go to edit mode and scale this a little bit on the x-axis. I'm gonna add the two loop cuts with Ctrl R and scale them on a Z-axis just to get these edges so they are not too sharp when we add the remesh. Another loop cut in the middle, and we can select this vertex here and with GG move it to the left a little bit so we can get this swallowtail looking flag. Now we can add remesh modifier. And I want to turn on the wireframe just to see how much geometry are we having as we adjust the voxel size. I'm going to lower the voxel size to somewhere around 0.7, and I'm happy with this. We can apply the modifier now. If we go to edit mode and select everything by pressing A and M and merge by distance to remove any overlapping vertices. I'm going to select these edges on the top and bottom and on the left side and move them apart a little bit just to make everything as even as possible. To create a pin group, we can select these vertices on the left side, and if you want, you can deselect some to make it more like original, but I'll just keep all of them. And we can go to data here and add a new vertex group and assign these vertices to this group. Now we can go to the physics tab and we can turn on the cloth. Underneath here, we have these different presets for different types of fabrics. I'll keep the cotton for now, but I will increase the quality a little bit. I'm going to decrease the speed, decrease the vertex weight. I'm going to increase the air viscosity a little bit. You can play with the rest of these, but for now I'm going to skip and go all the way down to the shape. And here we can assign the vertex group that we created to this pin group. And also under the collision, we can turn on the self collision. If you press play, we can see that the flag is falling down, but these vertices that we pinned are staying in place. But now we need to add some wind to this. So we can go to Shift A, Force Field, and select Wind. I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees on the Y-axis and move it to the left where the pin group is. We can increase the strength to 3000. And if you press play now, we have a nice flag on the wind simulation. You can spend much more time refining the settings to get the look that you want, but I'm happy with this. So I'll go back to the physics settings and go to cache so we can bake the simulation. Here you can set up the frames that you want to bake, and when you're ready, you can press bake. If you save your file, you will have an option to select where do you want your bake to be saved. After the bake is done, you will see this blue line showing which frames are baked for the simulation. Now, before we go any further, we need to UV unwrap the flag. So we can go to edit mode, select everything with pressing A, and press U and project from view. Before you click anywhere else, expand this window and select scale to bounds. And if you go to UV editor, your UV should look something like this if you made a similar flag. Now I'm going to split this window so we can use it for geometry nodes and shader editor. First, we can go to shader editor and we can add a new material. Also, we can change the render engine from Eevee to cycles and device to GPU. And we can go to render view. I'm going to turn the world color to black so we're only lighting with the lights in the scene. And I'll move this point light around until I'm happy how it looks. Definitely spend more time setting up the lighting, but for this demonstration, this is okay. First, I'm going to add the attribute node and the attribute is going to be UV map. And I'm also going to add a transparent Blender logo that I downloaded from blender.org. And the reason why I'm using UV map from the attribute instead of the default setup is because we will need to change geometry to instance later when we use instances. Now we can add a color mix node and attach alpha socket to the factor of the mix node and color to the color of the principal BSDF. Now we can select the colors that we want to use. Later we are going to add to this, but for now we have a basic material. We can start building up geometry node setup. I'm going to change this window to geometry nodes and we can press new. First thing I'm going to add is subdivision surface nodes so we can get more geometry to work with. I'm going to set this to 3. Next thing is mesh the points node. And we can lower the point radius. As you can see, we have a bunch of points representing the flag now. The reason why I'm not using distribute points on faces node is because due to flag deformation, it's giving some small glitching, which maybe wouldn't be that visible, but instead of doing unnecessary complicated ways of fixing that, I'm just going to use the mesh to points, and this will look good as well. Okay, now we want to introduce a little bit of randomness and make it look like the flag is being torn on the ends. First, we can add a gradient texture and the name attribute node. And we will use UV map. If we preview this, we can see that we have a gradient from left to right. To control this, we can add a vector map add node, and I'm going to also add a value node so it's easier to control this. For now, I'll leave this on 0, so later on we can animate this gradient. And I will add a color ramp node. And invert these flags. And move the white parts all the way till almost everything is white. Now, to break this up a little bit, we can add the color mix node. I'll set this to color dodge. And we can plug in noise texture here. I'm going to uncheck normalize and increase the scale for quite a bit. I'm going to need another vector matte node, and we can duplicate this one. And if we press play, we can see that noise is not following the flag, so it wouldn't look good. We need to plug in the UV map into the vector socket of the noise. But first, we are going to plug this into the vector matte node set to multiply, as I want to stretch the noise. We also need to increase the value to see what's happening. Now, if we increase the middle number, we can see that we are stretching the noise and we're getting the look that we want. We can also increase the factor of the mix color and experiment with the settings of the noise texture to get the look that you want. I increased the details and a little bit of roughness. Now we can plug this into the selection socket of the mesh to points node. And this is what we're getting. It might not look great yet, but as we add more details, it will look good. Okay, now we want to add the particles in these areas that we cut out. We can make some more space here. I'll add the join geometry node first. We can add the simulation zone and connect the output to the join geometry. We can duplicate this join geometry node and place it inside of the simulation zone. Now from this subdivision surface, we can connect distribute point on faces node and connect this into the join geometry node inside of the simulation zone. And if we press play, we can see that the new points are spawning each frame, but they are staying in the same place. So we need to add a set position node. And if we add a small amount on X here, we can see that they are moving to the right. To control this properly, we can add the vector math add node and connect this to the offset. I'll add 0.06 to the X, and also I want to add a little bit to the Y, but because we rotate the plane without applying rotation, we need to do this on the Z here, and I'll add 0.02. Now we have these points moving to the right and a little bit towards the camera. As you can see, they're all spawning on the same spot all the time, so we can add some randomness by plugging in scene time node into the seed of the distribute point on faces node, and now it's better. For the bottom socket, we are going to use the noise, but before that, we will need the scale node and the subtract node. We're going to subtract 0.5, plug this into the scale node, and for the scale, I will use 0.3. In the top socket, we can add the noise texture. For now, I will use scale of 3 and increase the roughness a little bit. I'll also change this noise type to 4D and add the driver into W to add a little bit of movement. And we actually need to plug in the color socket into the vector and not the factor. If we press play, we can see that we added randomness into the movement of the particles. You can play with the scale here to get different results. As you can see, now the points are spawning everywhere, and we mainly want them to be on the ends where the tails are, specifically in the cut area. So we need to create a mask for that. Luckily, that's easy, as all we need is to invert the mask that we already have. And we can do that by just duplicating this color ramp node. Now I want to break this up a little bit, so we can add another color mix node. And we'll set this to linear light. We can reuse this noise texture and make sure UVs plug into the vector. And we can plug this factor into the B socket. We can control the amount with the factor here. To make this better, I'm going to add a map range node. And from max, for now, I'll put to 0.2, and to min, -2, and to max, to 3, to make this contrasty. Now, with from max, we can control this, and later you can animate this if you want these spots to appear only on the beginning and fade out later on. The white areas that you see is where the particles will spawn from. We can plug this into the selection of the distribute point on faces node. And we can preview how this looks now. Now we can increase the number of particles to 3000. And just for preview, we can add a set point radius node, just so we can see them in their final size. But this won't matter later as we're going to use instances. So as you can see, we have a lot of particles flying out of the frame, and each frame we are adding new ones. So this can be taxing to the system. And as we don't see them, we can delete them after a certain time. For that, we need to capture age attribute. So we can add the store name attribute node here, and we can call it age. We can connect the math node set to add to this, adding 1 on the bottom socket, and to the top socket, we can connect the age attribute. Now we can need the lead geometry node here at the end of the simulation. And we can use this age attribute connected to greater than compare node and plug this into the selection here. And we can write the amount of the frames that we want to delete these particles. I will do 55. So now you can see that the particles are being deleted after they are older than 55 frames. You could also randomize this by adding random value node and set the range. Okay, next thing, we can add a set material node at the end here, so we can see how this looks with the material. We can select the material that we created, and we can go to render view. Now it's time to add an instance on points node, and I will use cubed for instances. When I plug this in now, they will be huge, so we need to adjust the scale. Later on, we will scale them according to age, but for now, 0.006 is okay. I also want to add some randomness to the rotation, so we can add the render value node. But if we zoom in, the rotation is affecting all the particles evenly. So we need to add a set ID node at the beginning here. And now it's working as we intended. To get the texture back, we can go to shader editor And we just need to change this from geometry to instancer. We can also lower the roughness to 0.1. And now we are getting a little bit of sparkling effect. To improve on this, we can duplicate this attribute node. We need to write the position here and change to geometry. Now connect this to Voronoi texture, and we need to connect this color output to normal map. With very low value, we can connect this to normal socket. Now we're having a bunch of these small highlight spots. To add to this, we can add a bevel node and lower the radius, and this will give us a little bit of more light reflections on the edges. Of course, you can enhance this further with the compositor. We can go back to geometry nodes. Instancing this many cubes can be very heavy, so I'll mute this node for now until I'm ready to render, so it's easy to preview how everything looks. Now we can animate the camera movement quickly. I'll add the empty into the scene, and we need to parent the camera to the empty. Now on the frame 12, I will add a keyframe to the empty, and we can go back to frame 1 and rotate on a z-axis and add another keyframe. Now I also want a movement to continue, so it's not a static, and we can go to the last frame. I will set 80 as a last frame, and we can rotate the z-axis slightly more and add another keyframe. You can definitely refine this more in the graph editor, but I'm not going to go through this in this video. We can do similar thing to the camera as well, so we have a little bit of zooming as well. We can select the camera and go to frame 12, and in the camera settings, we can add the keyframe to the focal length. Now back to frame 1, and we can zoom out a little bit and add another keyframe. Now on the last frame, we can zoom in a little bit more and add a keyframe. Again, this can be much more refined, but this will work as well. Okay, you could stop here and adjust a little bit more lighting and render, but I want to add my own twist to this and add more detail to the animation. In the original, the flag forms from the vortex, but I want to make it look like it's forming from the fibers. We can add two set position nodes. One will be here after the mesh to points, and another one after join geometry. Now we can duplicate these three nodes, and we can plug the color into the offset. We can already see something happening. To make this look better, we can increase the middle value to 4 and top value just a little bit. We also need to add a scale node to control the strength of this effect. You can experiment with these values as well with the noise texture till you are happy with the results. Have in mind, this will only be on the ends where the tails are. For that, we need to create a mask. So we can add the gradient texture. And also we need to add another noise, but this time I will turn on the normalize and lower the scale. We can combine these two with the color mix node set to linear light. If we preview this, we can see how it looks, and if we need it, we can adjust the settings more until we are happy how it looks. We need to add a vector mat add node to control the position of the gradient, and I'll put minus 0.5. We can plug this into the color ramp node and into the selection of the set position node. And now we can adjust the settings even more to get what we want. This will give you just a little bit more randomness, and I think it looks good. Okay, for the other part, we can use the same setup. We will just copy this scale node, and we can plug this into the offset of the set position node that we placed after join geometry. If we increase the scale, we can see the effect better. Now I want to animate this. So on the frame 0, I want this in the full effect. And on the frame, let's say 16, we can go to 0. Or a very small number just to leave a little randomness. I also want to add a mask to this coming from the other end just to make transition more smooth. We can duplicate this add node, and I will add a value node as well so it's easier to animate this. This needs to go through the color ramp node, and we also need to invert the colors. And we can plug this into the selection of the set position node. With this value node, we can control the transition. And we can animate this. So on the frame 1, we can have this on 0. And on the frame 15, we can increase the value until it's almost completely gone. And if we play this, I think this looks cool. I also want to animate this value that we set on the beginning. On frame 12, we can add the keyframe the way it is now. And on the frame 1, we will increase the value to 0.9. Reason for this is to have bigger areas spawning particles in the first few frames, as you can see here. Now we can do the setup so the instances are scaling according to age. I will do this with this node muted, just so it doesn't slow down my viewport. So we need to use this age attribute, and we also need the map range node. So these first two numbers will be how many frames will take between minimum and maximum scale that we set. So we can write 55 in from max. Next two numbers will be the minimum scale and the maximum scale, which in this case, we want to finish on 0. So to max, we can write 0. And in the to min, we will write the actual scale for the instances, which in this case is 0.006. Also, you could randomize this as well. Now we can plug this into the scale, and I will turn this node on. And now we have these particles scaling down with age, which makes for smoother fall off on the ends here. Next thing I did is I duplicated the light and moved it to the side towards the right, and I lowered the strength and changed the color temperature to 3200. I also added the cube into the scene and I scaled it to cover the whole area that we are rendering. And I added a new material with the volume scatter node, so we are getting some atmosphere, which also helps with the lighting. For the smaller particles, you can set up similar system we did with the flag with the simulation node, but I just used dust particle from Creative Shrimp, which actually helps you to create the embers and dust particles easily. They have also a free version, so you can try it out. And that was it. I was ready to render. I hope this was helpful and you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next video.